Thank you, Marcelo, and hi everyone. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about my experience and about space. So why did I get interested in space? Well, it's not something that came up later in my life, but it came out when I was like the age of my little daughter Claudia that I have here. Um, my my father is an astronomer, and he was living in Canada back then, and doing some interesting stuff there and also in the U.S. So I used to go to Kennedy Space Center and see rocket launches and go to different other places. We had also a little launch base in Spain called Arenosillo. I'm from Spain, from Granada, and I was living in Granada because they were tall mountains. Well, they still are tall mountains, and that's a good place to look at stars and planets because you can put telescopes up there, and the atmosphere is thinner, so you can see better through it. So I was living there in Granada, and I always felt that when you're a kid, sometimes you have the impression that um, all the other kids probably have the same experiences, like, but that's not necessarily true. They have wildly different lives. So for me, space was a common thing, was something that was discussed in the kitchen or when we were in the car or eating, um, because there were missions to Mars, to Venus with the Soviets back then and other people, and I kind of grew up expecting that somehow in the future, space would be much more commonplace. I also had early exposure to computers, which happened to be quite beneficial. Some people have made fortunes from having the lack of having early exposure to computers. I didn't make a fortune, but I learned a little bit how programs work, how computers work, and had a bit of a head start in that. And that was because my dad used computers, initially punch cards, little cards with holes. They used them to put programs on the computers, and I would just shuffle them and make a mess of them when I was little. Um, and So just like I had the impression that in the future, computers would be much more commonplace, and that future has actually materialized, and we're talking through a computer right now. But also had the impression that space as a place would be much more settled and much more used than it is. And that bit hasn't happened yet. And so I went through a conventional career. I I went, I studied aerospace engineering, went to MIT, worked at the European Space Agency. All those things are supposed to be very good, and it's a check. But what I saw there was that the people that I interacted with, they had not, I mean, they were very smart or very talented, but they had not felt this connection with space that early on in their lives. They just became interested in that, thought it was a good career. Like if you work at the European Space Agency, it's awesome because you don't pay taxes and you can have a great lifestyle and you meet interesting people, and the food at the canteen is awesome because because it's the European Space Agency, the food has to be good for the people from Finland and Italy and Spain and France, which we're all very picky with our food. And so the pasta is just al dente as it should be, and everything, the olive oil is just like it should be. It's really good. And but but you don't build more space stuff with that incentive structure. What I mean is people there were just having a life and enjoying things as they are. I couldn't see a passion to make space a lot more commonplace. And this is something I've always felt. I've always felt that I mean, always, when I realized that I was privileged to be exposed to these things because of my dad's work, I thought, well, I need to extend that privilege. So people start a space company because they want to have a city on Mars, or they want to move manufacturing of of the planet, or mine the asteroids and become trillionaires because they are mining the asteroids. That's quite different from my motivation. I find all that very cool and hope everybody succeeds. But my motivation is helping make real other people's dreams about space. So if you dream of getting married up there, or writing poetry, or providing connectivity in places where currently there isn't, I don't know, whatever that dream is, we want to make it happen. We want to make it easier. And since I had not, started PayPal or anything like that, or sold a big company when I started my company Zero to Infinity, I had to start really small. And that's something that's generally good. You start something with a minimum viable concept. And I knew balloons were not as expensive and complex as rockets, even though my background was in rocketry and I had worked on rockets. To get rockets right requires a lot of funds, and it's much harder to raise them, to find other people to partner with you and with resources than balloons. And there is so much balloons can do. These pictures here are from test flights. This video in the back using balloons, and that's a capsule that eventually will take 4 passengers and 2 pilots to the edge of space, and you get that view. So I knew that in the early days, the Soviet Union and other countries were working with balloons, and that's how they learned the ropes. That's how they learned how to breathe in space, how to come back down from space safely, how to communicate. All that was done with balloons way before big rockets were used. So that's why we are focused on balloons. I mean, our company is called Zero to Infinity. We fly up to 36 kilometers or so, but it's not called 0 to 36 kilometers because there is an ambition of going beyond. And I'm convinced that sooner or later, space is going to open up for business. It's going to be much more accessible. And we would like to contribute to that happening. And we're doing this from Spain, flying. We've flown over 50 missions. And we have plans to both send people up there and send satellites in a much more Earth-friendly way. Right now, some of these systems pollute a lot and are not super efficient because they're really copy-pasting missiles from the Cold War. In the Cold War, there was the Soviet Union and the United States, and they were pointing missiles at each other. So they built a lot of missiles, and that kind of technique of building these missiles is what's really been applied for most satellite launches. And we want to do it in a different way. Basically, we break the problem of reaching orbit in two. First, get out of the atmosphere. Second, pick up speed. And the picking up speed, when you do it up there where the sky is black, is way easier than picking up speed in the thick atmosphere where we live. I mean, we sometimes are not conscious of the air, but if you go in a car and you put your hand out of the window, you can feel really, really strong. And that's just at the speed of the car. Can you imagine if you need to reach orbital speeds? It's like molasses, it's like honey sticking on you. It's super hard to go through, but that doesn't exist over there. Claudia, ¿puedes encender la luz, porfa? When I was starting, I didn't have a lot of capital to start with, and I can give a little bit of advice for you that might be thinking with the idea of becoming an entrepreneur. The initial capital came from people that had some connection with me at some point. For instance, they went to the same school, or they had similar life situations. So you need to connect on emotional and life levels, not just explain the business really well. That's necessary, but that's not what gets you the check. It's the human connection that does. Is that they see themselves in you in some way because they've been through a similar thing, or they went to the same something, or they belong to your same tribe. I hate to say, and a lot of our problems come from our tribalism, but also a lot of opportunities come from understanding that this tribal thing is really in our brains, in our DNA, in the way that humans behave. It's hard to change. It's pretty hardwired. So finding people that are connect at some level with you is very much more efficient than just shooting for everybody else to get this trust and make them partner in some way, or become employees, or become investors or customers or what have you. So I understand there is a period also for questions. I'd be really, really happy to to answer some of those because that's usually the most fun. I've heard this story many times myself. I'm always interested in um, getting your you guys' points of view.
Well, thanks for that, Jose Mariano. The uh, best use of our time, I'd say, is perhaps to go a bit deeper into your multiple projects. I mean, I don't know which ones are confidential, which ones are very public,
On
but
the projects.
yeah. So if you could go through Bloom and Blue Star, then
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm happy to do that. Yes. So for the moment, what we have is something called Elevate, which is a service. You come with something and we take it up there to the edge of space. And what that something could be a satellite that you've designed or a new type of camera or a new type of solar panel. Up there and test it. So they pay us for a service to take something up there, stay for a while, and then come back. Much more interesting is going to be Bloom. Bloom is going to be the service where people like you and me, and even children, people with medical conditions, people from all nationalities are going to be able to see the Earth like this, see that the Earth is round, no flat. Well, we can bring in maybe some flat earthers and prove them wrong, but I think they already know. Um, and that experience can last for over 2 hours up there. Um, so I think it's of course it's hard to predict the future. And one thing I think it's important is that we sometimes take for granted that the future equals progress, but that is not necessarily true unless you take hands in in unless we collectively work to make that progress happen. It doesn't happen by itself. There are lots of fields, and space is one great example, that have been stagnant with time. They haven't really made progress as expected. There were movies and science fiction like saying in 2001, in 2010, in whatever, and it hasn't really necessarily happened. I think the good thing is that some cultures around the world do have an expectation for a more successful and more advanced future, especially those that have seen progress themselves, like China or the countries in the Gulf region. Claudia. So however, here in Europe, for instance, most people that talk about the future, they talk about it in terms of doom and gloom and everything's really bad and climate change, whatever. So I really think it's up to us, and we can move and we can decide where we live, and um, and there is certainly an opportunity that humans will be expanding around the solar system. It is totally doable. It could have happened 20 years ago. It didn't happen because there wasn't the will to make it happen. And it could happen in 20 years, or it may never happen. It's really up to us on how we play our cards. Nothing is written in stone.
so tell us more about current plans into the factory. So I've seen it, but maybe you can share a bit more about your next steps and what you're interested in doing with the near space tourism.
Yeah, so um, we we have an approach, to bring how do you go from flying things to flying tourists? Well, some people say you just get the permission to do it and do it. And that's an approach. Our approach is okay, we want to first do some stunts, like some big records, and then fly professionals from different countries. One day, every country will have a bunch of people that have seen this view. And it won't be a difference. Right now, a lot of people think, well, if I'm born in the US, I have more chances of seeing the Earth from space. Or if I'm born in Russia, yes, but if I'm born in, I don't know, some other country in 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 Andorra, then I have less chances, whatever. We would like those chances to be much more equal. And we are engaging with governments around the world so that we make it much more affordable to get their own professional astronauts or astronauts, however you want to call them, people that see this, because they can also, give these kinds of talks and talks at schools, and make people see that it's within the reach. So there's going to be a process from things to heroes, as we say, so people that are selected and trained for it, and then tourism. And when tourism comes, that's really going to be a big change of perspective, because once you see the Earth, it's round and it's one. You can't unsee that, and it changes you forever. If you're interested in that topic, you can Google overview effect. The overview effect is the change in your mind that happens when you see the planet from outside, and that's really what a lot of this is all about. Is about gaining that wisdom of seeing that we are all on the same ship, and that wisdom needs to be as spread as possible, initially on the most influential people around the world, but eventually to everybody.
What about Blue Star? If you want to talk a bit about that, it's also super interesting.
Okay, sure. Well, I did talk a little bit earlier, but the Blue Star is a patent that I filed. It's important to file patents. It's not that it's the absolute protection for your idea, but at least you can talk to investors and show them, look, we're serious about this, blah, blah, blah. And they like these kinds of things. So the idea is, instead of launching rockets from the ground or from an aircraft, using a balloon to launch rockets. So the balloon goes to the edge of space, and from there, Blue Star shoots out to space. And that allows you to design rockets in a totally different way, because rockets right now are designed to go through the dense soup of the atmosphere, the dense layers of the atmosphere. And that part of the ride is very bumpy. Everything shakes. It's really hard. There's a lot of engineering involved that you don't really need if you cover that first part with a shortcut with the balloon. And this will allow us to fly better satellites that can provide more bandwidth, more resolution in pictures, because you can fly a telescope that is very light, but it's quite big, that would shatter to pieces, would break completely on a conventional missile launcher. But on Blue Star, you can have a nice, smooth ride to space. And with those telescopes and with those satellites, we can better understand the planet. We can better understand what's happening to it. We can better connect it as well. We can better bridge the digital divide between one places and others. And this is something we've been working on for some years. It's still a long way ahead. We have a lot of letters of intent from commercial customers. We even have received some funds from the European Space Agency to start the development. It's a project that requires quite a lot of funds, but basically to completely develop Blue Star is less than what it costs to launch one Ariane 5 rocket that Europe launches every year, about 12 of them. So there's a lot of gain from using these new ideas and not just copy pasting what has been forever the solution. And from the edge of space, there's really a lot of things that can be done. I mean, one interesting thing you can when you are at 30 kilometers of altitude on the Earth, the air is like the air on Mars in terms of temperature and density. It's very similar. So you can study how a Mars base would work by flying modules and maybe modules with people up to that altitude, because it's very similar to the surface of Mars. Um, so balloons really have a lot to give, and not only on this planet, but there was recently a discovery of phosphine on the atmosphere of Venus. Phosphine is a molecule that seems to be related to life, and the best way to study the atmosphere of Venus is actually flying and deploying a balloon on Venus that can explore those altitudes where there might be, who knows, microbial life on our neighbor, on our twin planet, Venus, that is so hot because of the runaway greenhouse effect that it has with its thick CO2 atmosphere. So lots of opportunities, and I could talk for hours, but I think we need to move on.
Yeah, and, would you be able to talk about the Cloud Star solution as well, as you have a website? I'm curious myself to learn more about it.
So this is, when this is starting right now. It's really not up to for prime time, but we're working on it. So when this pandemic started, I thought, well, what can we do? Can we make masks? Probably, but they would be very expensive. Can we make respirators? Maybe, but they would probably kill people. I mean, they wouldn't be very effective. Why not we study all the ways of working or with these or things that we are good at. So up there where we fly, it's very interesting because the sun throws some rays that can destroy bacteria, but are very, very safe for people. They don't go through protein barriers like the eye or the skin. So we've been working on a system that could, being a grain of sand to solve this whole pandemic situation. It's a system. I won't go into detail; it would take a long time. But the core is some type of lamp that recreates this light that exists at the edge of space, and this light can clean the air and the surfaces without any effect on people. There's of course lots of ultraviolet germicidal lamps, and you can buy them on eBay or Amazon, and but those are harmful for people. You can't really be exposed to that light. I mean, you can get sick or you can get sunburned. But this kind of light that is usually blocked by the atmosphere, but you can reproduce it with some technology here on the ground. This kind of light doesn't harm you at all, but it completely wipes out viruses and bacteria. Not larger things, but bacteria and viruses it does. So that's part of Cloud Star Solutions, and we're launching these very soon. And hopefully it will be of use because there's all these new variants and from Brazil or from South Africa. Or I think every country is gonna get one eventually. So we need maybe to employ 21st century technology and not just copy pasting 19th century solutions. 19th century solutions such as banners or masks or distancing or vaccines are great, but they're 19th century solution. We're in the 21st century. There might as well be other technologies that can help us. So even though this is a different field, it's the same kind of thing of not copy pasting and thinking from fundamentals and from the physics of the problem.
Oh, no, awesome. Looking forward to hearing more about that. And then one final point is teenager engagement, right? So if you're talking about turning teenagers into entrepreneurs, a lemonade stand comes to mind, or walking the dogs, or helping with smaller jobs. But what we're trying to do is, in fact, opening doors and opportunities in far more complex industries via virtual internships. I believe we may have talked about that during some of our calls. And I'm wondering, what is your perception and perspective on things that teenagers can do from home to support space companies or near space companies? I mean, which tasks do you have in your day-to-day operations that you think that a teenager could help with from any location in the world? That could be market research, that could be data entry, that could be whatever you need that adds value, but does not need to be done from an office. Which ideas would you have in mind?
Yeah, that's very very interesting. Uh, I think one thing that teenagers are already doing is they have a really significant role, I think, in space advocacy and telling their some teenagers are big influencers on Twitter or TikTok or these things, and they're pushing for innovative solutions and making it really hard for the incumbent systems to just keep copy pasting, just keep doing what they were doing. I mean, for instance, when you see what SpaceX is doing, they have a tremendous fan base. And of course, I would not just like to say that the only thing that a teenager can do is being a fan, because they can do so much more. But that's already something that is happening. I think the future is going to be as a little bit as you described, quite more distributed, you know. And some of the tasks that have been done by organizations like yourselves um, are going to be broken into parts. So right now it would be tricky, but let's say that oops, uh,
Like a
no,
rocket going off.
yeah, we had a uncontrolled disassembly of something. I mean, you've probably been following this whole thing with GameStop, or some of your listeners. So right now, the biggest hedge fund is totally decentralized and distributed and democratic, because it's just a bunch of people on Reddit that are bringing some of the largest Wall Street firms to their knees through their collective little actions. So eventually, I would like not just to make space more accessible for ideas, but space data. And if you have space data distributed, and there are things that you can find, it would be fun to find them. I mean, if you
Yeah.
gamify, how you say that, it can be quite beneficial and quite fun. Uh, but that is, I mean, we would require much better space data than what we have, a much better means to distribute it to people. But I think that's kind of the inevitable part of the future, is more distribution and easier access and like that. Yeah.
It's like the SETI program is a great example, right? So they're trying to find extraterrestrial life. They need computing power. They created a software and they manage the operations. But there's in fact millions of people out there in the world that are downloading the software, installing it, and being part of that journey. So we should probably be talking about how to get to the work you're doing as well. Without taking too much of your time, of course, I need to add value. Otherwise, no, it's not a fair exchange. But that would be a great opportunity for them to say, I'm working with a space company, and this is my task. And, these are the results, and I think that could help them in their careers, but also becoming more curious human beings and bolder in their objectives in life, right? Because once you have an association of something that's so advanced and daring, that's likely to reflect other actions in your life as well. You're not going to have a conservative mindset because your mind is expanded already so much.
Yeah, that's something certainly to think about, but you're onto something. Thank you. And thanks for the opportunity.
Any parting words of motivation for teenagers worldwide?
To infinity and beyond.